The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is one of the most influential games of all time, and today I'm here to discuss why it's a not-so masterpiece. And while it does have its flaws, like the finicky controls on the N64 because of the controller shape, some inconsistencies and some conflicts with even a religious group, it's still undeniably one of the best games of all time. First of all, when talking about Ocarina of Time, it's important to note that it came out 2 years after the very successful, or dare I say, semi-successful launch of the Nintendo N64 console with great titles like Super Mario 64 and Star Fox 64. And while those were classics and bangers, musically and in gameplay, those didn't help sell the console well, especially with people who like Zelda content. And even though A Link to the Past already established the series in a good light, Ocarina of Time would come and solidify that review and expertise of the Zelda franchise. Introduced many new songs and staples, or even revisited on them, like Zelda's Lullaby, Kakariko Village, even the main theme. Speaking of music, my next point is that the songs in the soundtrack were almost all bangers. I mean, you could get something in the same game, like, for example, Kakariko Village, Gerudo Valley, then Horse Race, and Zelda's Lullaby. I mean, one side of the spectrum is very goofy and silly, like Gerudo Valley and Horse Race, but the others are just incredibly solemn and feel nostalgic-y, like Kakariko Village, and especially Zelda's Lullaby for the people that played Link to the Past just 4 years before this game came out. And they are still bangers to this day and have been remixed a lot of times in the Zelda franchise, most notably the Kakariko Village theme and the main theme, and Zelda's Lullaby. However, most of these would be only exclusive to the game and would make the game's notoriety much bigger, like the Gerudo Valley theme. Another good thing I want to point out is the lore that are brought to the Zelda series. If you haven't read the Hyrule Historia, which is the book that is officially published by Nintendo, which compiles all the official lore of the Zelda series, it sits right on the crossroads, splitting the 3 main timelines. If you aren't a timeline nerd like Zeltic, who likes official Nintendo canon things. But yeah, this game introduces the Kokiri, reintroduces the human like Ganondorf, or more or less introduces him, and it uses the ocarina to split the timeline apart and bring forth the importance of the ocarina as an instrument to time travel and for music in the series. Another thing that I should talk about that's very good about this game is, oh my god, Nintendo does the most perfect fucking game since please re-release it on your next console. Anyways, about that tangent, sorry about that. Anyways, I really also want to point out how nostalgic this game feels and what new mechanics it brought into the series, like the usage of ocarina in some games, especially Majora's Mask, and also the Z targeting system, which would be a staple in any other Zelda games and other RPG games, like Elder Scrolls and Dark Souls. And I also want to point out how absolutely perfect the masterpiece side of the game is. The music is perfect. It contains bops that have been used a lot in YouTube history. It's been reminiscent even throughout the next decade, so like the 2000s. It's even been very popular in 2010s, which is pretty impossible for a game as old as Ocarina of Time, especially considering like titles like Star Fox 64 and Bomberman 64 haven't been popular ever since, unless you're talking about the underground communities. But still, this game's story, mechanics, and just overall perfection lives up to the golden standard, even to this day. And yes, while the game is almost perfect in every way, Nintendo should really release it on their next console. There were some flaws that I would like to discuss that don't majorly affect the game, but affect the game outside of the gaming world and maybe bring down its score and the continued idea of re-implementation with better controls still wanders around. The first thing that I would like to point out is how finicky the controls are on the versions that were generally playable by the public, aka the 3DS remake and the original N64 version. Both of these have had very finicky joysticks, especially the N64 with its weird camera movement system, but I won't blame the developers of the game because the 3D camera angle movement thing was still a very finicky and new thing back at the time, and the player either had to do it with the joystick or through a combination of the arrow buttons, I think. But still, moving on, the 3DS controls were very similar to the latter, where there was a tiny joystick on a portable console, which finally meant that the Ocarina of Time game was fully portable for once. It was just very small and garbage, and you also had to do with the buttons and dual screen. But you also had a peripheral for the Nintendo 3DS. Nintendo 3DS thing that added a new joystick to the console. I don't remember what it was like. But yeah, it added just a new joystick, but you still had to buy that and have 2 additional AA batteries on hand. And unlike the very much needed to pay for Nintendo Online Subscription Plus version of the N64 emulator on that console, aka the Nintendo Switch, both of these have very finicky controls that make the game at least very hard to play. Next up, some quality of life issues. First of all, the game might not be as good built for everyone, especially newer generations who didn't experience the game as nostalgically as we did. But it might have seemed very rudimentary even in this day. Second of all, the game has probably had its day, because in the 2020s the only major N64 game I hear discussed or made lo-fi remixes of its music of is Super Mario 64, and Ocarina of Time isn't usually in the spotlight as it was back in the 2000s, 2010s, and 1990s. But yeah, as we discussed, it still held up in the zone like 2 decades after it was phased out. The last thing I want to mention with this game is the controversy surrounding the Fire Temple and the Islamic Church. So as you've seen in the Fire Temple images and/or music, if you plan a certain copy, it includes some chant-like sounds that resemble Islamic chanting enough that the official Islamic Church had to intervene and officially either talk or sue with Nintendo. But in the end, Nintendo removed the chanting in the Fire Temple in the later versions of Ocarina of Time. And they also removed all the images surrounding Islam in the versions, like the images on the fire shield and some signs. Apparently, the chanting was from a free sound CD library that one of the sound designers at Nintendo acquired and put these sounds into the Fire Temple theme, which then got released on the N64 Ocarina of Time cartridges. But when they realized this, they removed it from all other instances of the game. However, it might have been just random chanting. But I'll probably either cover it for another video or just stay as is.